Battery storage. With solar, without solar, how does it work? How much would it cost for your home? How does it work operationally? Well, today I'm going to be breaking all that down for you in a deep dive. By the end of this video, you're going to understand how battery storage will work for you. Let's go. So first of all, what is battery storage? That's kind of an interesting question because there are different brands, there are different makes, there are different sizes, and all of this can get a little bit confusing. So, in its most basic form, we're storing energy. Think of it a little bit like storing water. As you turn the kettle on, the power gets drawn in through the cable that comes from the grid, water gets drawn in through the pipe. We can actually store this, a little bit like a water barrel at the side of your house. These come in different capacities. And we refer to this capacity in kilowatt hours. Don't confuse kilowatts with kilowatt hours. And effectively, what a kilowatt hour is the ability to be able to turn on a kilowatt load. So kilowatt being throughput, think of the water flowing through the pipe. If I turned one load on for an hour, and that was flowing at 1 kilowatt or 1 litre per hour, then effectively it would take 1 hour for that to drain. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So we now understand what a kilowatt hour is, but how do we now understand how much capacity to go for? So sometimes this is manufacturer dictated, as in the manufacturer just makes set capacities. For example, the Powerwall 3 to my side here is a 13.5 kilowatt hour capacity. And what this means for you is we could turn on a 1 kilowatt load, like a kettle for example, for 13.5 hours, and that battery storage will run that load for a period of time. Other manufacturers are available in some other different sizes. This is where it can get a little bit confusing. So like the Sig Energy Sigen store, for example, you get them in 6 kilowatt hour battery modules or 9 kilowatt hour battery modules. And we can essentially mix and match these together to create different capacities, so bigger water barrels effectively. And in order to work out how much capacity you need, we would typically look at your electricity bill. Say you use 3,650 kilowatt hours of power per year. Well, every single day on a weighted average basis, we use an average of about 10 kilowatt hours of power per day. But the one area people get caught out and where they often buy too much battery storage is they're thinking, I have to allow this battery storage to last for a full 24-hour period. And that's where you could get it wrong. I'm actually going to be going through some of the FAQs where people get things wrong and some of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to tariffs and battery storage sizes and how to pick it around your actual tariff. Because as I say, some people wind up buying more battery storage than they need. But I think, first of all, we've got to look at some of the fundamental principles that go behind battery storage. What does it do? What's its functional play in your home? Let's have a look at the different setups that are involved. We've got this battery storage module that's to the side of me here, but this is battery only. And I think I'm going to start there actually because it's relevant. You don't have to have solar panels to have battery storage. So you can fit battery storage by itself. And what this would effectively do is take power in from the grid during off-peak hours at night or at certain periods during the day where it's cheaper on the national grid. Hold and store, think about it like the water barrel, so it can effectively store this energy. And then when you get to a peak time where the electricity prices are higher, your battery storage can use that off-peak energy to meet the demand of the home. Thus, you don't need to buy an expensive peak energy and you can load shift your energy price to an off-peak rate. But that's only one of the benefits. So one of the next benefits is the battery storage ability to be able to take the energy that's generated from solar panels and as the solar is being generated, be able to store it in your battery storage. So if you're at work like myself now, solar is actively being generated at my house and effectively instead of that just being forcibly exported out to the grid, it's going to store in my battery storage for later. And when I cook my tea will effectively be cooked off the basis of the sunshine that we've had today. And these battery storage modules can either be fitted on a hybrid basis. So we talked about inverters on a previous episode. So if you're not too clued up on inverters, go and have a bit of a watch of this after this video. But effectively, if you have a hybrid system, battery storage can link directly in with it. Or if you've already got solar panels and you're thinking, I want to add a battery system to it, Battery systems can be added in what we call an AC coupled format. Essentially, it can be added on after you've had solar panels without the need of loads of expensive equipment or potentially voiding any warranties of your existing system. It can sit alongside it. One of the other key benefits of battery storage, like with this system here, is it can offer whole house backup. A word of warning, however, not all battery storage will offer you house backup. A lot of people think, I've bought batteries, in the event of a power cut, my house is simply just going to be backed up automatically. My system will work that way, but that's not always the case. The Powerwall 3, which is this kit that I've got to the side of me here, can be set up in a couple of different ways. So it can be set up, and it's cheaper to set up this way without house backup. Oh, the sun's come out, that's lovely. And what this means is we can buy in cheap energy from the grid, store it in the battery, make the most of any solar generation that's on the roof. But in the event of a power cut, because it doesn't have a product called a gateway, which offers house backup, the system will simply turn itself off in the event of a power cut. So if you're thinking to yourself, I want a battery storage system, I'm prone to power cuts, I want a battery storage system that will back me up in the event of a power cut because I'm prone to this, it's really important you're asking your installer, does my system allow for house backup? Is that limited to a certain number of circuits? And having a discussion around that setup to make sure that that's either specified, or if you want to save on a bit of cost and you don't need it, make sure the part called the gateway is effectively taken off. Another thing to note is if you've got different forms of renewable energy, and what I mean by this is a wind turbine, if you've got hydroelectric, for example, or some other form of renewable energy, it's also possible to couple battery storage alongside this. In principle, a wind turbine, hydroelectric and solar, they all use an inverter, converting DC current to the usable AC that we see in our homes. So the battery storage can pick up on this generation, can effectively store that energy as it's being generated into battery storage. So where would we use battery storage and what kind of use cases do we come across? It's looking at the specific loads that you would see in your house and then making sure the battery storage is adapted to. So let's use the example of air conditioning to start off with. If I've got lots of solar panels on my roof, well, if you think when it's hot, solar's being generated. So actually from an aircon point of view, as it's being generated, the demand can be met. So often we just use battery storage to be able to smooth this supply out rather than needing to store vast quantities of energy. However, let's say we look at a heat pump usage, for example. In the winter, your usage is considerably higher than it would be during the summer. So solar panels will be great for offsetting your summer usage, meeting that hot water demand. But in the winter, you're going to go, right, the snow on the panels, what now? And how can battery storage help me? Well, this is where we look at time of use tariffs. And what do I mean by time of use tariffs? As I mentioned earlier on in the video, we get off-peak and peak periods. And then sometimes with certain tariffs, you've got to be careful of this, super peak. This is where it's really expensive to buy energy in from the grid. That's because it's expensive for your energy supplier. But you can often charge battery storage more than once a day. People think, right, well, I need 10 kilowatt hours of battery storage because I use 10 kilowatt hours a day, for example. But if you can charge your battery storage up more than once, like an Octopus Cozy, for example, you could get away with installing less battery storage. So if you're on a heat pump usage and you use 30 kilowatt hours a day, if I charge that battery up 3 times a day, well, that's still 30 kilowatt hours. I didn't need to buy 30 kilowatt hours of battery storage. This helps you massively leverage the off-peak windows and minimise the initial capital upfront investment you would need to make in battery storage. And the two then start meeting hand in hand. So looking at your actual consumption, where you're consuming it, what time of year, what time of day are you consuming it, and looking at those individual use cases. For example, myself, we're a family of 4. Most days we're actually out of the house. So I rely upon battery storage to supply the first bit in the morning when I cook my breakfast. I'm quite religious for having my eggs in the morning. And then during the day, that battery storage then tops up from solar. Then in the evening, I then use the energy that's been generated to be able to meet my tea time demand. I get through all the evening, and then the cycle goes back round again where I charge back up off peak, piggybacked alongside my electric vehicle tariff. And there is a holy grail with electric vehicle tariffs because they're so super cheap overnight. I think I pay like 7 pence per unit for 6 hours overnight. So I'm going to be able to leverage that and basically pay 7p year round for my electric during the summer. Solar generates, I effectively pay nothing and then get a credit also from the grid for any excess that's also been sent out to the grid. It's kind of a bit of a win-win really. How much should you spend on battery storage? Well, there's an interesting question. Later on in this video, I'm actually going to be breaking down all the different costs involved and giving you some idea of different setups, what they're likely to cost so you can see how competitive they are. But if you're struggling with fundamentally, how much capacity should I buy? Should I buy 5 kilowatt hours? Should I buy 10 kilowatt hours? Then feel free to drop a comment below. We're hopefully going to work as a bit of a community to work out your usage, how much you should be going for, so you don't end up buying battery storage that's too big for your home or too small, as the case may well be. So when it comes to battery storage, there are different brands that are out there. Think a little bit like a washing machine, for example, analogy, or cars. So with car brands, we can get Dacia, we can get BMW, Mercedes, and we can also buy the Rolls-Royce of battery storage. And your price is actually quite reflective depending upon the brand and manufacturer you go with. For example, your budget brands are the likes of Fox ESS, Sunsync, Solax. And if you go real budget, you're looking at like Fogstar, for example. Your mid-range brands have your likes of Sig Energy, for example. This is kind of a good bridge between budget, because ultimately, like, return on investment matters, but also long-term quality as well, because quality matters. It's all right buying something that's super cheap, but it's quite likely to only last a very short period of time. The design functionality of them are designed to be super duper budget. On the other side of this, you can then get the premium side, like the Powerwall 3 that's next to me. It's a little bit more expensive. They're incredibly well built. That's the one thing I really will say. All the little screw terminals, the weather seal, just the way that they actually put it together from an engineer's perspective is just like unbelievable, but you pay a little bit more for that privilege. So this is when you've got to look at use case. I think most people want reliability long term. There's no point in buying cheap because you end up just buying twice, or that's my personal opinion. There'll be some people out there, this is not a slating job of don't buy those ones, because there's lots of people out there that'll be really, really happy with those other brands. So I really do appreciate that. If you only use 1,500 kilowatt hours a year, 2,000 kilowatt hours a year, the Powerwall 3, for example, it'd be a bit like getting a sledgehammer out for a panel pin. It'll do the job, but it's probably just a bit big. The reality is you want to be looking at the brand you're going to go for and the size of system around your actual usage. For example, if I have a heat pump that's really high demand, what you'll find, and this is where you've got to be careful of the small print in the data sheets, is that some of the battery storage manufacturers have throughput limits. When you're charging the battery storage 3 times a day, well, you're effectively putting that battery storage to treble the amount of use it would normally have. So this is where the Powerwall 3, for example, comes in, because you get unlimited cycles. It's simply designed for more throughput. It's designed for longevity. You can push it harder. The inverters are bigger in them. They can charge quicker than these alternative brands that are cheaper. A little bit like if I'm driving 30,000 miles a year, I don't go putting you on a bicycle. But if you only nip to the shops, a bicycle might be perfect. It's about looking at these brands and not just going, well, it's 10 kilowatt hours and 10 kilowatt hours and that's comparable, because that's a little bit like going, it's got a 2-litre engine, it's got a 2-litre engine, one's a BMW, one's a tractor. It's important that we're not comparing apples with pears. So what metrics do we look at when we're comparing battery storage? Well, ultimately, there is the battery storage capacity. But just be careful with this. Look at a thing called depth of discharge. So if I've got a 10 kilowatt hour battery and a 10 kilowatt hour battery, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can use the full 10 kilowatt hours. For example, the Powerwall 3 is 13.5 kilowatt hours with 100% depth of discharge. And what this means is you can use the full 13.5 kilowatt hours. However, other manufacturers will often advertise it as a 10 kilowatt hour module, but when you get into the nitty gritty of the depth of discharge, it's only 8.76 kilowatt hours that you, at home can actually use in the battery storage. So you think you're getting 10, but actually you're getting 8.76. You can have one that's advertised as 10 kilowatt hours and the other one that is, but actually one of it might be slightly less. And you're then trying to compare these quotes thinking you're getting the same thing. And that's not always the case. The next thing to go on to is discharge speed. What you'll find is the inverter can sometimes limit the speed within which a battery storage can charge and discharge. So if you've got a limited off-peak rate, you've got to be confident that the battery storage system can pull the power in fast enough during the off-peak rate, store it in the battery storage, and call that demand up from the battery and meet your house demand. So the Powerwall 3, for example, can charge at a rate of 5 kilowatt, so it can fill itself up in about 2.5 hours. And it has a discharge rate of 11.04, so it can discharge its battery, deplete itself fully in little over an hour. Whereas other brands, you may well have a 10 kilowatt hour battery module or 13.5 kilowatt hours similar to Powerwall 3. But if I've only got a 3.6 kilowatt inverter, it would take over 4 hours to be able to charge the battery storage. And it would take over 4 hours to be able to discharge the battery storage. And you might think, well, it doesn't matter to me, I'm not bothered. But if you've got multiple loads, so if I turn on the kettle, the cooker, the dryer, you can effectively have energy stored in the battery and not be able to use it, and you end up drawing in from the grid regardless. What happens when the battery storage runs out, or what happens when the battery meets its capacity? It doesn't just turn itself off. What most people don't realise is battery storage runs in parallel alongside the grid. So the battery looks to meet the demand first. It can measure what the incoming grid supply is doing. If the battery storage is working at full speed ahead, so let's say 11 kilowatt, which is quite unlikely, but we'll go with it. Let's say this 11 kilowatts demand's being met, but it's a 12 kilowatt demand, then the extra kilowatt comes in from the grid. That's all that happens. And obviously, once the battery storage is empty, then the full demand will come in from the grid. So it's important that we pick the inverter size that's appropriately sized with the battery storage for your usage, but we also pick the required capacity that's needed to be able to meet the relevant home demand in your home. So I appreciate that this is quite a complex subject, and I'm doing my best to try and keep it as simple as I possibly can. But I also appreciate that you might be sat there going, he's not quite answered that question that I had. If you do have, bob them in the comments below, and I will do my best to be able to kind of describe how it will work, provide references, so it gives you the comprehensive information you need to make the right decision for you. At the end of the day, it's really expensive, and I'll come on to price and budgets and stuff in a moment, and likely indicative costs. But before I do, there are some real common frequently asked questions, comments that I've had previously that I just thought I would address as part of the video before you ask them in the comments below. It might seem basic, but I often get asked, do I actually need a battery? Well, no, you don't have to. If you want solar panels all by themselves, they will work. As I mentioned earlier, that power can then either be used when it's being generated or exported out the grid. But if you've got quite high winter loads, then most of the time battery storage would be relevant. It's going to make savings. It's going to help give you that level of grid independency. If you get power cuts, as I mentioned earlier on, you're going to need that battery storage to be able to pull it in. So it is quite case specific, but you don't have to have it. It's kind of an optional extra subject to your actual consumption and usage. How long do batteries last? I was really fortunate to sit down with the head of life cycle, actually, a guy called Paul Landregan, as one of these videos that we've done on the channel. And we were going through life cycles and I was asking these genuine questions. Now, a lot of this information the manufacturer doesn't want to present to you. They don't want to tell you when these systems will need to be replaced as part of their life cycle. The mass majority of battery storage now, lithium ion phosphate battery, which is the most common type of battery storage, they'll give you a 10-year warranty. So what this does is this often covers the actual battery storage. They'll guarantee you an energy retention rate at that point of 10 years. So batteries degrade very slowly over time, but most battery storage will give you about an 85% energy retention rate at 10 years. And then effectively, the warranty stops. But the battery just doesn't go, right, 10 years, we're done, we need to recycle it. It will actually last a lot longer than that. The average lifespan of lithium ion phosphate battery, depending on how many cycles you've run through it, of course, will be in between about 16 and about 20 years. So if you're in your forever home and you're thinking, I'm not sure about life cycle. I think we've reached that point effectively where they're going to last that period of time and they've been tested for that period of time as well. Another question I've been asked a few times is, if I'm not ready for it now, can I add battery storage later on? So if you're thinking of going for solar panels, a top tip would be ask for a hybrid inverter, because this can be coupled with battery storage quickly later on. We can add it retrospectively on what's called an AC coupled basis. You can retrospectively fit battery storage to almost any system, whether it's to existing solar panels, like a feed-in tariff system, whether it's okay, I want to come back to battery storage later on, or battery storage by itself. It's very much possible to kind of add this on later on if you're not quite in that position to do so right now. So I've also been asked a couple of times, if I had a set budget and I was to choose battery storage or solar, which one would I go for? Now, the answer to this is probably a little bit nuanced. If I had a heat pump and my demand was predominantly in the winter, then I would probably go for battery storage. But if I had air conditioning, for example, in the summer, I would probably lead with solar panels. The reality is solar panels have a longer lifespan. So manufacturers of solar panels will give you a 25-year product, 30-year power warranty. So it often makes more sense to go for the solar panels because they're going to last longer. When we look at the longevity of time, the reality is you're getting also more grid independent. So as energy prices, particularly now so, are volatile, you've effectively got your own generation up on your roof. But I think for those people that have big, heavy winter usage, or that effectively are looking for that next step in terms of savings, they actually work very well together as well. So that's where you've got the solar panels and the battery, and it all kind of goes in as one ecosystem, because then you're truly getting grid independent. You can save it, store it, move it. You don't really need to rely upon the grid. You're your own little mini energy plant. So let's have a look at cost. And I think the good thing about Google is we can now Google the costs of inverters and battery storage. And whenever you're having a quote, I would always ask your installer to be breaking down what parts and components are included as part of the installation. I regularly see quotes come through that will be cheap or budget that often don't include half the parts that they actually need when it comes to the point of installation, and they get added on later. Whereas I'm a firm believer in transparency. Show what it is, you know, at the end of the day when it comes to cost. So entry-level battery storage system, typically speaking, if you were kind of 10 kilowatt hours of battery storage with a straightforward, say, a SIG Energy side install, mid-range inverter, there will be slightly cheaper models that are out there, but for reasons mentioned, you may or may not wish to go with one of those. You'd be about £5,000, I would say, as an entry-level system in terms of battery storage by itself, fully fitted. Bear in mind, there's 0% VAT on battery storage as well. That legislation changed. When it comes to slightly bigger systems, there's not all that much of a jump in price. So a Powerwall 3, for example, without house backup, fully installed, subject to installation, is about £6,500. If you wanted it with house backup, a gateway is normally about £1,000. So a kit like this, £7,500-ish, give or take a couple of £100, that would cost you fully installed for a Powerwall 3 and a gateway as well, fully kitted out for your house. So between kind of your mid-range brand and your upper range brand, or even between the top spec and actually some of the budget brands, there's only a couple of grand in that comparison process between the two. And if you're thinking, well, this has got 10 years unlimited cycles, if it breaks, Tesla will actually fund the cost of installers to be able to swap the part out, provided it's been installed properly by an appropriate installer. So I'm a little bit like, sometimes it's actually worth taking the jump up for the jump up in quality. A little bit like you do when you're comparing from a car brand model point of view. You think, it's only a little bit more and I can get this extra warranty out of it, or these unlimited cycles instead of being limited. So do take the time to do that comparison properly when it comes to a cost position. What you'll also find is an economy when you're installing all at the same time. If you think about it, if the company's there installing solar panels, we're there installing anyway, we're already putting cables down the side of the house. If we connect them into a power wall, it's the same as connect them into an inverter. You'll often find the company can benefit from that, lowering the price slightly as well. So have a look at that as well. Ultimately, when it comes to it, I want to train you to get the best out of your system. So that's battery storage, but I've also done videos on inverters, the basics of solar panels, solar panel comparison, and individual deep dives on products as well. So if you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.